Ask the Podcast Coach for September 15th, 2018.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music. It's Saturday morning. It's 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I am your fun-filled host, Dave Jackson. Wait, I'm not fun-filled. That guy's fun-filled. I'm just Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com. Joining me right over there is the one and only fun-filled, sounding like Barry White today, Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. How's it going, Jim?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Yeah, the voice is a little hoarse. I spoke all day yesterday in a big, it's like a conference type deal, right? And it's loud around you and everybody else is talking, so you got to talk louder. And we were talking to groups of people, so I literally shouted for 6 hours yesterday, and it takes its toll on your voice. So I appreciate. Hey, it's good to be back. 2 weeks. We took last Saturday off. And
it was interesting because I went to Podcast Mid-Atlantic in Jersey/Philly, and it was interesting because they had a mixer, I guess you would call it, the first night of it. And of course, what do? They played somewhat loud music, but it was different because the annoying DJ were people that you knew. Like Harry Duran is back there just wicca and doing the whole 9 yards, going
He's
to
quite
town.
the DJ.
He is.
He is quite the DJ.
And I think Joe did a little, and Neil Galarte was going to, but Neil had his mother-in-law pass away, so I'm sorry to hear that. And then he hurt his Achilles tendon. So he was like, oh, well, I can't move, can't walk now, so I'm done. So Neil wasn't there, but he was going to do that. And it was okay. They did, I'll give them credit. It wasn't like ear-bleeding madness DJ music, but nonetheless, I was still screaming. And finally, I was, the thing I like about that conference is it tends to, because it's a little cheaper than the other ones. So you get a few more absolute beginners there, which is why I like that conference. So I was trying to answer some kind of podcasting 101 questions there. And I finally just said, can we go out in the lobby and talk? Because it was I had to talk the next day. And I was like, I don't want to get up there and go, today we're going to talk about, you sound like Peter Brady.
At our 20-year high school reunion, we had this really loud DJ, and everyone made their way into the lobby, outside of the room. And because it was so loud, and we just wanted to talk to each other. We didn't really care about the music. And he was trying to play 80s stuff. And we're and so everybody migrated into the hallway. And there was 7 people left in the room for this DJ at one point. And I felt bad for him, but it was kind of know your audience too. This is a reunion, and people want to, most times, people just want to talk to each other, right? That's kind of it drives me nuts.
I've always said, if somebody, creates a new podcast event, I would get a little boombox, if those still exist, or whatever, some sort of powered speaker. I would put on Kenny G very softly and just put it in the corner until you get more than 6 people there. Because I think the reason for that is if there's 4 people in the room and 2 are talking over here and 2 are talking over here, you can eavesdrop on each other's conversation. But when you get 6 or 8, now it turns into an official murmur. It's just murmur, and you can't really hear each other or whatever. And so I don't know. I would just put some music on in the background, and then once you get more than 10 people in there, cut it out. What are you sharing on your screen?
Hey, I gotta. So Thursday night. Well, for one, Jason Bryant was listening to Home Gadget Geeks on Thursday night with me, flying over Greenland, which was super cool. I think he's in Europe right now, and he's listening to us. So he said, I think he said his 11th country listening to us from. But Emily, I put out a challenge a couple weeks ago. I said, hey, if you guys want to send shirts, well, Mike and I will wear them. And of course, Emily's book is coming out very, very quickly. We're just exactly a month away from today. So October 15th. Nice. So she sent us the story behind t-shirts that Mike and I wore on the shirts on the show together. Mike always wears blue. He's a big Creighton fan here in town, and they're blue. And then I wear red because I'm a Husker fan. And so she sent the different color shirts. And so Thursday on Home Gadget Geeks, Mike and I got a chance to kind of promote. So as podcasters, a great way to engage with your audience and let your audience promote and some of those kinds of things. And so she took a picture of it. So maybe this is podcast inception, right? So she took a picture of it, posted that on Twitter during the show, and got some, I hope, we got some good promotion for the story behind it. But we had these guests on from, they were from Zmoto. And they looked in the very beginning when we came in, and we hadn't started the show yet. I think they thought we were little goobers for having matching T-shirts.
We're twinsies.
So they were like, "Hey, we noticed matching shirts, huh?" We're like, "Well, it's a promotion for one of our listeners." But
they didn't get the memo.
They didn't get the memo. That was a quick. That Zmoto interview. They let me know on Monday. They were like, "Hey, we'd like to do a couple weeks." And I'm like, "I'm actually booked for the next 5. Can you do this Thursday?" And they're like, "Absolutely." And they had a blue snowball. And I told them to get a good mic, and the marketing works, right? The marketing just works. I don't know why it works so well.
Yeah.
So they jumped in, and so that was a quick. We weren't even really that prepared for them, but that was a quick quick turn on that. So, anyways, the point of that was Emily did a really nice job of. She got those shirts to us. I got those over to Mike. We're able to wear them on the show, and it's just kind of a great way to promote your podcast.
Well, I actually mentioned Emily yesterday, where he said trying to push a button on his. Okay, I guess I'm not going to add a cue point. I was on a.
Did you start the recording? Did you start the recording, Dave?
You know what? You know what? That's why I can't add a cue point. They're $900 so well spent. I will say.
So great.
I'm out of practice, man. It's been 2 weeks. Anyway, I was on this. Have you ever been on one of these? We're doing this big online summit, and there's going to be 8 million speakers and 50 trillion people have signed up to watch. And you're like, okay. So I signed up. Now, here's the fun thing of these. Obviously, you're not going to get paid. B, you get paid in exposure. And C, nobody shows up live. It's all, like they said, 525 people signed up to see my session, which is great. I have my iPad in the way. So if we use the magic number of 3%, 525 times 0.03, that means if I'm lucky, 15 people will see that. And that's about right. Cause I couldn't really see the chat room, but I'm going to say I probably had 10 people there, maybe from what I saw. I had about 5 people that were rapid fire, like asking questions. They were super engaged. So that I loved. And I'm still using the Slick text thing, and I got another 5 subscribers. So nice. To me, yeah, I'll take it.
Worth it.
But if you see these things, it's just one of those things, again, set your expectations, because when you hear like we have 500 people sign up for the conference, and I'm like, and the other thing, boy, you mentioned know your audience. I didn't realize, which I should have, because hello, it's an online summit. I had a lot of people from across the pond. So when I say subscribe by texting SOP to 31996, no, you can't do that if you're across the pond. So I needed to adjust my slide that said either go to schoolofpodcasting.com/subscribe or text SOP to 31996. So I was like, oops, I didn't know that. I should have known that, but that's the other thing that was kind of weird about this conference. Somebody told me, hey, they're doing this online thing. They're looking for speakers. So I applied, I got approved, and that was about all I knew about that. I had no idea who my audience was. I just was like, they're like, we need you to podcast about business. And so I was like, oh, I can do that. Pulled up my podcasting for business presentation, and it went well. And like I said, we had a lot of people but I did mention Emily in that, because it's kind of like, why should I podcast? And so like Gary Leland has saved, he used to spend $10,000 a month on Google AdWords that he doesn't do anymore because of his podcast, and all these different people. And I said, and it is to a certain extent a great way to build a platform. And I said, Emily Prokop from the Story Behind podcast has a book deal that's coming out next month, and people are like, oh, And then Seth Ressler, RESSLER. I'm trying to remember what show he's on, but he's the guy that's kind of connecting radio people to podcasters. And he interviewed the guy from iHeart, which just bought the How Stuff Works network. We can talk about that in a second. But Seth asked him, he goes, is podcasting the new minor leagues for radio? And more or less the guy kind of said, yeah, in a way. He goes, because we're looking at and here's what was really interesting. I think the guy's name is Bobby Brooks. And there was another guy. He kept naming famous DJs, and I never heard of any of them. He was like, oh, he's the next Bobby Brooks and the blah, blah, blah. And the next, and I'm like, okay, Aside from Rick Dees and Howard Stern, I can't think of
Jason.
What's the other guy? The American Idol guy. You know him.
Yeah, no, I know who you're talking about. Ryan Seacrest.
Ryan Seacrest. Yeah. I don't know that there are super famous DJs anymore, but he did kind of mention that there are. He said there was a DJ that had a co-host, and they were going to kind of think about letting him go solo. Mm-hmm. So what they did is they had him start a podcast and start doing a radio show solo to kind of get used to it. And they said so it was kind of a interesting thing, but yeah, that's I guess. Go ahead.
Perry Duran on Podcast Junkies. I think it was. I'm a little behind on Podcast Junkies, so I think it was earlier in the summer he interviewed her, and I forget her name, but she kind of started. She was a DJ first in radio, and then started podcasting, and then kind of took some of that back to her DJ work that she did. So, but doing the podcast kind of helped in some of the DJ stuff, and she kind of mixed that all together. Harry just continues to crush it on Podcast Junkies. It's so good what he does. If you're a podcaster and you're not listening to that, you should. But so yeah, I mean, there's that DJ world's really different now. And what we think of DJs is not really DJs anymore. And the whole thing is getting mixed up. Podcasting has helped me be a better MC, and I like running or being in front or helping large organizations have events move forward. Like I'm best in 1 minute increments, just kind of help people do those kinds of things. But podcasting has definitely helped with that. This week, I was on Ross's show, live stream deals, I think, and he celebrated his 1 year, and I loved the innovation. I had a funeral on Thursday. I couldn't make the show live, so we pre-recorded it. He tried to play it live on the show through Be Live. I think it's Be Live now, right? Is what they're using, and no, I don't think that's right. But so when he played it, the sound wouldn't come through. And as I was driving back from the funeral, I was trying to listen, and so the sound wouldn't work. And man, Ross just was a champ. He just stopped it, and then he had time to fill in, because he was doing this show. It was live, and he had different speakers lined up to go live. And then all of a sudden, my slot, which was 15 minutes, was empty, and he had to kind of think like, what do you do like when you have those kinds of things scheduled and your guest doesn't show up or there's technical difficulties? Do you have material? This is where the radio guys are really good at this. Do you have extra material ready to go to fill in? I mean, I heard that somewhere else on a podcast this week too, where it's like, no, those radio guys, they over prepare for their shows, and so they have more material than they can get to. And so when the sound didn't work for me, Ross just kept going. He recapped what he had done. He promoted what he was doing going forward. You could see him kind of working through that. So I think, Dave, when you're thinking about doing that live stuff, that's probably another component you need to have is, do I have kind of backup material? Like, we got to think about this all the time. Do I have enough material to get through? And if something fails, am I ready to go?
Well, that's it. I think, live, I heard Rob Greenlee on the Spreaker live show talking about live versus, doing everything in post. And I think what live does is it makes you quicker on your feet, so that if I go, what do you think, David Lee Roth? And instead we get,
don't be boring.
And I'm like, I mean, Glenn, or whatever. It's one of those things that yesterday when I was doing that presentation, it dawns on me that in this presentation, I have some audio clips, and I'm like, oh crap, how do you play audio clips in a Zoom meeting? I'm like, that's not going to work. So I grabbed the audio and I threw it in Dropbox, pulled it into the thing I'm using right now, iJingle, and kind of renamed some stuff. Well, in the process of doing that, PowerPoint saves your audio files with the same name because it's a different slide, same name of the audio. And to make a long story short, I had 2 clips of John and 1 clip of Gary, but I needed a clip of Jason. Well, the Jason clip was John. So I go to hit Jason and out comes John's voice. And I go, oh, we just heard John. And I hit it again. And it dawned on me, okay, this isn't going to work. You don't have a Jason button. And I was just like, okay, well, let me explain what Jason was going to tell you. He's blah, blah, blah. And it was one of those where it's like, oh, okay. And instead of going, oh my God, hold on a second. It's like, okay, so Jason saved $1 million in his, blah, 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 blah. And you just roll with it. And I think that's one of the I always tell people, if you're starting out, I'm not sure live is the way to start, because it does add another kind of technical component, but it is handy to just get used to having, every now and then something's going to not work, and you just have to go, okay, well, moving on, we'll just do this now. And
yeah, I think more often than not, I was doing my Gallup podcast, and we do all those live first this week, and the host was, his earbuds were causing massive static sound, and he was just having trouble hearing anything. And so we got the show started, and he goes, hey, can you just excuse me for a second? And sure. And so I just kept going. And fortunately, I had some material. I had a story that I had queued up that I was going to share later in the show. So I just was able to launch right into that. And I didn't know how long he was going to be gone. So I drug it out a little bit to kind of make it work. But I think if you're in that live space, this is where it's different. And Ross says in the chat room, he says, I really think live streaming audio or audio video is closer to radio than recorded podcasts.
Oh, yeah.
And I think he's right. And it takes a different kind of, when you're going to be live like we are right now, you got to kind of be ready. I mean, I'm in front of me, I have a list of 6 things that are ready to go in my mind that, at some point we could bring up as we go through the show. Every week I do this. I have a checklist here that is, I've got things that if we need to fill them in or whatever, and I check them off as we go. And not every week we don't get to all of them. Sometimes we do, but it is one of those good, handy things to have as a live podcaster, to make sure you got a checklist and maybe have more material than you can cover. And don't feel like you have to do it all either, right? That's the thing about live. Some people feel like, nope, I have the material, I got to jam this all in.
Right.
Or I'm somehow not validated as a podcaster. And you're like, no, you can leave stuff out. You don't have to cover everything. I love that Glenn quote, by the way. It makes me laugh every time. I'm not sure if it's Glenn or Kermit the Frog, but I love that Glenn quote.
Yeah. The other thing I should put on that checklist is press record. I think that would be the first thing on the checklist. That would be awesome as well.
Well, my wife has been recording, so she's working with a guy who's creating audio content that they're gonna bundle together as a learning session, right? And they're using Zoom, and he was recording it, and they went 45 minutes, and then he hadn't pushed record. So Sarah has a sticky, press record on her screen.
The one thing now I have, because you have your 6th thing, I have a whole Trello board.
Yeah, Trello is a great way to do that.
Yeah.
We should share a Trello.
Well, do you use Trello? Because
we should just share a Trello. That's so dumb. I mean, yeah, no, it's great. It would be a great way to do it. Google Docs. It's always worked for us. I don't know why. In the 4 years we've been doing this, we've never had to have a shared list. Like no. We don't have conflicts that way. It just works. I get comments all the time from folks when I'm talking to them, and they listen to this show, and they'll always kind of comment on the chemistry between us. But that has actually been something I think that has worked really well without having to have a tool. Like we don't really share a common tool, and that's very unusual. I think one, because we don't always feel like we always have to be the one leading the conversation. Like you're content to, I'll be talking and I see you kind of go off thinking and doing other things. The same thing with me. You got a segment, I'm kind of thinking that might spark some things, So I think that's why it works, because neither one of us have to kind of be the guy.
Right. Hey, you're talking too much, man. I want to talk now. I have a client that does interviews, and I'm amazed, because I always cut it out, where she'll be like, the one time he or she said, and don't forget to, let me chime in there too. And I'm like, ooh, that's a different point of view. I'm always about interviews should make your guest sound. And she's like, no, I got to plug my stuff too. And I'm like, ooh, okay, whatever. Yeah. Speaking of, because I know he's listening, the one and only Ed Ryan.
Ooh, nice.
We will talk about Ed here in a second. But Ed, if I was you, I found something out about, he does podcasting for Radio Dummies.
Mm-hmm. I was on there. That's cool.
Yes, he needs radiodummies.com something. Because right now, now the cool thing is he has a decently named show. So if you Google the phrase podcasting for Radio Dummies, you're going to find Probably something over at Radio Inc. But he needs a link, I would think, at Radio Inc. that says like, click here to listen to the podcast or something, because he's got it on Spreaker, which is fine. But there's no easy way for me to say, just go to blah, 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 blah.com, or, it's like you kind of have to Google it and then it'll come up. And I'm like, ooh, that's, so I know Ed listens and he's always listening for tips. And he's, you know what I like about Ed? You talked about Harry, or Ed has some, I knew he was going to ask about the radio industry and things of that nature, but Ed just has a cool, again, kind of a conversation. The one that always makes, this is the new thing that makes me cringe. Next question. Like I'm talking,
when they said that, yeah.
When I'm interviewing Jim, and Jim talks about, blah, blah, blah. And it was at this conference. I'm like, excellent. Next question. What is the thing? And I'm like, you don't do that in a conversation. You know what I mean? It's like you're at a party and you're like, yeah, and that's how I fixed, that was my first car. And you're like, awesome. Next question. If you're on a first date, next question. What's your favorite movie? So it's just, when I hear that on a podcast now, I'm like, ooh, next question is so.
Where do you think that comes from? Like, is that a technique somebody used, or?
That's a good question, because I've never seen Barbara Walters, or I don't think even Larry King does that. Does he? Does Larry?
I think you could say it You could say it more conversationally,
right? It just seems
what you're doing. Like, okay, that leads to the next question, which is like, you could say it that way if you're trying to lead folks around. By the way, radiodummies.com is available. Just saying, if you want to buy that, Radio Dummies, DOMMIES, is available for you. Yeah, I don't know what would lead why, but I think you're right, Dave, is just to make that as comfortable and as conversational as you possibly can. Even if you're doing rapid fire questions, we're contemplating at Gallup, I have these hour-long podcasts, and I continue to get feedback of, hey, could you make those a little shorter? And so we're thinking about this quick hit idea. So they'll be called the Coach Quick Hits. 15 minutes, very edited, very quick, like get in and get out kind of things. And I think on some of those, we won't do follow-up questions. It'll be John Lee Dumas style, where we have 4 standard questions that they're going to write their answers around, and then we're going to want to boom, 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 boom. It's about getting information out. So there won't be a lot of conversational questions. Now, I probably won't say next question is, because that makes it sound like it's on a list, and I think that's why you're kind of against it, Dave, is because it feels like someone's reading off a list, right?
Checklist, yeah. And that's what was cool, is Ed had some cool follow-up questions. I forget what I was asking about, and he said, well, why is that? And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. So yeah. And what was interesting is, man, does he have a turnaround? I literally recorded that in the morning, and it was out like an hour and a half later. I was like, I just did that. I was like, wow, that's again, kind of the joy of doing live. He did a little bit of editing, but not much. It was up and going. Darwin Dave says, hey, what's the question of the month over at the School of Podcasting? And that is this month. And it's really where, Jim, if you had to do a 1 to 10, what do you consider, which end of that is good, 1 or 10?
Well, it just depends on where you're trying to get at. But for this example, let's say really good is 10. See,
I did it backwards then.
Because either way, as long as you're clear about it.
Because to me, like, we're number 1 is like the best.
Yeah.
But what it is on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is, oh my God, I love podcasting, and 10 is, I am ready to screw this stuff. It's too much work. I'm burnt out. I'm crispy. 10 is, I want to quit tomorrow. Where are you? And then more importantly, why? So if you want to chime in on that, you can go over to schoolofpodcasting.com/contact. I need your answers by Friday, September 21st, 2018. That is because that'll be coming out on the 24th of September.
You can go. I know Carrie's saying, I think most people think the intensity is higher up in the number, right? Because 10 is greater than 1. And so when you're trying to get to the intensities on that, you can do it either way, as long as you're saying.
Well, and if you think about it too, what do we call somebody who looks really good? Oh, they're a perfect 10. Yeah. So I got that completely backwards, but
it works if you explain it.
Like, I clarify.
We always say on a scale, and I like 1 to 5 scales, but that's what Gallup uses. So on a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 is, and this is, I think, the way you say it, like on a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 is this and 5 is this, and those can be anything you want them to be. You need to be really, really clear. I think most people put the positive on the high end and negative on the low end. That's kind of where it goes in most cases. So I think you're fine, but you can switch it.
Yeah. I realized I got one answer and somebody said, I'm just, it's great. I'm blah, blah, blah. And then they said I have a 7. And I'm like, I think they actually meant 3, but okay.
Yeah. Well, we also have a ladder scale. If you think of your life as a ladder with, 10 being the best possible scenario and 1 at the bottom being the worst. So, yep, I think probably in most cases that's the way it goes.
Yeah. Going back to the question point, Emily, of course, from epodcastproductions.com says, it's always nice when I hear somebody say last question and then they lie.
Yeah. But when I do interviews, so I'm in interview season. So I'm doing 4 or 5 30-minute interviews now for jobs. These are not recorded podcasts. These are people getting jobs, right? And so I've got these 15 standard questions that I ask. By the way, it's really important when you're hiring people that you have a standard list of questions that you go through so everybody gets the same chance. So I have my standard questions, and I will say, it's kind of rapid fire. It's 20 minutes. And I will say, as we get to the last one, I'm like, and now this is our last question, just to kind of get them, because it's one of those things it kind of mentally prepares them. I also tell them in advance, I'm going to give them a chance to ask me questions. And so when I say that's the last question, then they can start switching over to start thinking about, okay, it's going to be my turn here in a second to ask some questions, and I can get that done. So I do think it's a good idea to flag it, but you're right. If you say last question, although it's super hard in an interview, sometimes you ask and then it leads to another question.
I'm going to say that's the problem is they go, oh yeah, that was the time I was abducted by aliens. And you're like, okay, thanks so much for coming on the show. Like, you can't do that. You're like, wait, you were what?
Well, but you can't say, I know I said this is the last question, but this is way too interesting to let go. What's the follow-up? I find myself in interview questions at work. I'm actually better on the follow-up than I am on my podcast.
Yeah.
I'm not, because I have the questions written down, I'm not necessarily thinking about the next question I'm going to ask, and I'm actually listening. And then they'll say, this is really common all the time, is hey, what are you good at? And they'll give me some really bland, generic answer. And then I'm like, give me some examples of that. Like, what does that really look like?
Right.
So I wish I did that more when I'm podcasting without written questions, which I do a lot of. You're very focused on your next question.
Well, the few times I've been pulled into things that are improv, that's a whole new level of attention, because you've got to build on whatever the heck they say, and you're like, okay, I'm listening. And you said what? A red elephant is okay, what? And then what's interesting about that is you think I'm not going to be able to come up with something, and it's amazing how your brain will like, okay, I have to talk in 3 seconds, so this is what you're going to say, and you like, okay. You say so.
I just 2 weeks ago, I just did a whole series of interviews. I did I don't know, I must have did 15 of them over the course of 2 days live at Heartland Developer Conference, one of those conferences we talk about all the time. And that is, I don't structure any of that. And so you have to play. That's almost improv because I say, tell me who you are, where you're from, what you do. And they start. And then I've asked them a question in advance, like, what's your session going to be on? So at least I have some ideas. And I'll say, tell me a little bit about your session. And from that question, I have to build an entire interview, because the topics vary so much in a conference like that from person to person. Somebody might be talking about React Native. Somebody might be talking about artificial intelligence on AWS. So you have to kind of pull that content out. And so from that very first, here is what I do, you have to find one little nugget to hold on to, and then dig into that, and then dig into that, and then be thinking about, okay, where else do I want to go with this? And what am I trying to get out? I have a couple standard questions in my mind, like, what are you hoping your audience takes away from this, right? What are the 2 questions that you normally get after a session? So those kind of help to have some basic questions ready to go. But you're right, Dave. It's a lot like improv, because the subject are so varied. You have to just be ready for anything, and you have to really listen and be thinking about what's the next question. It's a lot of pressure. A lot of people are surprised we can do it so well.
Yeah, that's always amazing to me. Just any kind of interview is the fact that you have to listen, so you can have if there's a follow-up question. So you have to figure out, is there a follow-up question here? Do I need to go deeper? And then B, if not, what's plan B? What is the next question? All the while listening to what you're saying. And that's the part that's It's
Well,
tricky.
you listen for keywords when you're doing these kinds of interviews. You're listening for these keywords, and what I find in my mind, if I can because I can't keep a whole question in my mind and listen to what they're saying.
Right.
So as they're talking, I try to I imagine in my mind a paragraph, a sentence of some kind, and that's what they're talking about. And when they say a keyword in my mind, I circle it. So I might get. We'll use artificial intelligence as they may say something about artificial intelligence. And in my mind, I'll circle it and then just kind of hold it off to the side saying, okay, I'm going to form a question based on what they say at their end of their sentence around that one word to keep the conversation going. I have a pen with me all the time when I'm interviewing. You could do the same thing right on piece of paper. Dave, when we're done with Ask the Podcast Coach, I got a page full of things, just ideas, one words, things that you've said I want to play off of that help me remember those. So whatever, you're not going to sit there and type it. So you got to I always have a notebook or a piece of paper by me, and I'll just write one word, or I'll write a little phrase of something they say so we can come back to it. So there are tricks you can do.
Yeah, because Carrie's saying that. She's done a few interviews here, and she says, I just have a few bulleted topics to cover, but I feel this insane anxiety over what am I going to say next. Yep, that's perfectly normal. And that's exactly what I have a page here. It says why, friend, monetize, Ed. So that's what when I was like, hey, I need to go back and talk about Ed on that. Didn't know. So these are just things that I'm like, this is what I'm going to ask when I'm done. And I don't have to write out a whole question. It's like, okay, don't like right now. I just put in somewhere in a text box. I have Carrie's question. I put that in. I'm like, okay, I want to go back and circle around to that.
Yeah.
So
no, it's little tricks. Like I have Jason, because he had put a note right in the chat room. I want to talk. I got YouTube, Skype recording, Wi-Fi plug, Ross. Like those were my keywords of things, and we've gotten to 2 of the 6 of them. That are there. So it's just little tips when you're going. And don't be, when you're doing those live interviews. And nobody really has a hard time in conversations coming up with the next thing to say. So, when we're in normal conversations, you don't worry about your next question for the most part. So when you're, right, it comes to you. There are things I just trust in a lot of cases that they're going to say something interesting enough. And every once in a while I have a challenge because I'll have somebody that uses 2 sentences in their answer. And you're like, oh, you have nothing to hang on to. You're like, oh my God, I need more. Right. But in most cases, they give you enough. Just have faith. You'll get there. And your question will be there. But really listen, because they're saying really good stuff. And you need to be able to play off that stuff.
And that's why I always have a list of pre-made questions.
Yeah.
So that in the event that they throw you a curveball and they go, yeah, I've never really done that. And you're like, okay. Then you're like, you just look down because your brain hasn't figured out, okay, well, there's no follow-up to that. Yeah. Tell me when you didn't do that. What? That's not going to work. So that's where you go back to your questions. But there are times I remember I was interviewing Pat Flynn, and Pat Flynn was being Pat Flynn, and he's just spewing goodness. And I was like completely like just all listen, no thinking. And he got done and I went, okay, well, and I just said, all right, that's going to be edit point 1 because I had a question and it just left my brain. And he just laughed. He thought it was funny. He's like, yeah, I've been there. And I'm like, oh, I wanted to talk about this. So I did that. And guess what? None of that made the air. I just cut it out. But he thought it was funny. And I was like, dude, you're just being Pat Flynn.
Yeah.
But
you can acknowledge that, right? You can say, I got to tell you. And sometimes if you can have some things ready to say that aren't that meaningful, but at least get your brain going. So Dave, you get to the end of that and you're like, holy cow, Pat, I'm having a fanboy moment with you right now. Yeah. Here's, here's a couple things that really, here's a couple things. This is the improv. So, you're going to have to come up with 1 or 2.
Right.
Here's a couple things that really sat with me. Well, I really loved it when you said this, that phrase. I loved it when you said this. The other person, that's the clue to say, dig in a little more on that. They'll want to come back to that, right? Give it an audio break. They will jump right back in and explain it more. Then you can kind of recompose yourself for the next question,
Yeah, while they're digging in deep.
Just ask them if you get lost, ask them to go back around and repeat. And don't say that, of course.
Right.
But something that you really enjoyed in that, say, hey, let's explore a little bit. I really like this. Explore a little bit more with me so our listeners can really understand. Then in the next, once they've done it twice, that gives you whatever time to kind of recoup and get a question.
Yeah. Well, people that we don't have to question, but I'm trying to come up with a transition, and I'm
nice. That was just close. It's good, Dave.
Close. Is our awesome supporters. And I said when we came back, and we were talking in the pre-show, it's a little tricky to figure out who has come and who has left in the lovely world of Patreon. And so we will, he said, clicking. There we go. We want to thank everybody. This is one of those times where we're going to thank everybody. If you are 20 or above, you get mentioned every episode. But we have awesome people like Josh Liston on thebubblepodcast.com. And I owe Josh a huge apology. Remember Monday Night Football was started last week.
Yeah.
And they had a doubleheader. And I watched most of them. And I had a 7 a.m. meeting with Josh. Ooh. And that didn't work. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, buddy. I said I could make up an excuse. I said, but in reality, I hit the button on the alarm clock and did not get out of bed. So my apologies to Josh on that. But awesome people like Greg over at debtshepherd.com, Jonathan Bloom at weeklyawesome.com, Glenn the Geek Hebert, surviving down in North Carolina right now at a horse show in a hurricane. So that sounds like a ton of fun.
Tropical storm now.
Yeah.
Tropical storm.
Over at horseradionetwork.com, Josh Rivers at podcastingexperiments.com, Max Truscott at aviationnewstalk.com, and new $20 contributor. I'm sorry, I said that too early. Shane at Spybrary, who we love, who's been around and a regular contributor, but new. There we go. Military Money Movement. You can find that at just MIL, millmoneymovement.com/podcast. So that's kind of it's it's a hybrid. It's a money show, but it's geared towards military people. I'm like, oh, that's kind of a cool little niche. And then hold on, Dave's got to fix his PowerPoint. Remember we said sometimes you just have a train wreck live. That's all right. So we need to not hide the slides.
Just don't forget you're showing your screen.
I know. I'm like, there we go.
You don't want a Leo Laporte moment.
Exactly. Excellent. Yeah. And now I got to find Jim. There he is. So our $10 patrons, thank you so much. Frank Miller, who I still don't have a website for. Jeffrey over at Podnuts. That's PODNUTZ. Nick Subes, the Suberling over at CincinnatiSoccerTalk.com. Sean Park over at Be Your Own Nerd. And our $5 patrons, Darren Dake over at CornerTalk.com. Matthew at A Scottish Podcast. Eliquity over at TravelGlutenFree.com. Corey Finneran at IvyEnvy.com. I need to check in with Corey. I haven't heard what's going on with him lately. Jay Cleveland Payne over at jclevelandpayne.net/podcast. Jason Curtis at CUATX.com is their website. Jeremy Dennis at Transmissions with an S podcast.com. Some guy named Jim Collison at theaverageguy.tv. Joe Salsihai at stackingbenjamins.com. Joe Taylor at onfaceedge.com. Kim Slusher at distractedlifepodcast.com. Michael Ray. Rob Griffiths at bedtime.fm. Master Coldren at coldrenscrypt.com. Rob Griffiths, you can find him basically at bedtime.fm or storytime/peace out on that again at bedtime.fm. Troy Heinrichs at blacklistexposed.com. Carrie, I'm missing the Porter here. Carrie Porter Bond at bonfirestudio.com. I don't know if that's offensive or not to her, but I need to update that. Matthew, remember I said it's a little tricky because I'm hearing duplicates. Right. Matthew at scottishpodcast.com. So good we get to mention it twice. Chris Holofield, another new one. Thank you, Chris. He is at iamsaltlake.com. And what's interesting is I got to talk to Chris about that. He got a billboard. With I Am Salt Lake on his because it's a very local show. And I'm like, that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I wonder how much that cost.
We'll talk about it. It can be as low as $10 a day.
Wow.
Yeah. Ed Ryan over at Radio Podcasting or Podcasting for Radio Dummies. And that's where I noticed I'm like, it's hard to say where to get that because his website is this really long Spreaker address. But thanks, Ed. Ross Brand over at livestreamuniverse.com. And then Ryan P. Jackson at myperfectpodcast.com, another new subscriber. And that is a new podcast coming out very, very soon. And Dave's learning that if you don't click on the PowerPoint side, it doesn't advance the slides. Our $1 patrons, Adam over at oddadoutpodcast.com. And Anthony, who I got to see in Jersey at Route 66 podcast. So if you like kind of a history show, but it's all based about Route 66, check that out. The Audio Dice Network at audiodice.net. And I still hear Andrew Dice Clay when I hear that in my head. Barb over at anchor.fm/BarbTUSA. Sean at clarineat.com. See here, we have more we have, that was Cauldron's Crypt. See, I'm getting Cauldron's Crypt confused with the Creepy Kingdom at creepykingdom.com. Dave over at Ottawa Works. Diane Lane. Diane, let me know where your podcast is. I'll be happy to promote it. The one and only Emily Prokop, and you might know her from, there we go, the story behind podcast.com. Garrett Godfrey over at crowdfundingchristianmusic.com. Gary and Margaret over at beekeepingpodcast.com. Craig from ingleaspodcast.com. The Internal Latin Podcast Awards, which you can find at latinpodcastawards.com. Jason at TV times 3, and that is THREE.com. Jay at post. See, I thought it was post. I'm going dyslexic. Potstirpodcast.com. Lucas Apps at triangletactical.net. Mike at My Robot Podcast. Mr. Robot. I can't read today, apparently. Mr. Robot Podcast.com. Paul at fightingthroughpodcast.co.uk. Patrick over at bigseancepodcast.com. Brandon at seahawkerspodcast.com. Sean at slept in class. That's government class. Sleptinclass.com. Steve Sleeper over at earn.show. Wayne, the one and only Wayne Henderson over at mediavoiceovers.com. And Chris and Brandon, another new supporter over at FloridaFocusPodcast.libsyn.com. That's all about Florida college football, it turns out, because I guess there are two college football teams, and one likes one team and the other likes the other, and then they meet for I think it's a death match, cage match, something like that. But thank you to all our awesome supporters. We deeply, deeply appreciate that, and it keeps the lights on and helps Dave pay his taxes. So that's the fun thing.
Nice. We had a couple questions. Can we go back to in the chat room real quick? So Jason Bryan had asked about when you're replacing host providers, and you got to go back into your WordPress page because you've pointed at one place, and now you need to point at someplace else. How far back do you go? Do you think realistically? How far back do you go replacing? I have 370 episodes for Home Gadget Geeks. Do I do all 370?
Wait a minute. You switched.
Yeah, here, let me go back to the question here. We'll pull this up just to make sure I have.
If you switch websites, in theory, like I've moved, AskThePodcastCoach.com used to be on GoDaddy, and I moved it to SiteGround. Well, AskThePodcastCoach.com/whatever should still be AskThePodcastCoach.com/whatever.
Yeah.
You really shouldn't have to change anything unless you changed your website.
You're your host provider, right? So if I'm in WordPress and I put my host provider's link in there, so it knows where to get the MP3, and then I change host providers, I've got to go back in and update that post, right?
I see what you're saying.
To grab hey, now that's over here.
So it used to be on. Yeah, so it used to be on whatever Podbean.
It was on Libsyn, and now I'm on Blueberry. Let's say, and I need to switch. I switch those, right? How far back do I go? Again, the example, I have 370 episodes in 6.5 or 7 years, coming up on 7 years, or I think 8.
Right. What I would do first is I would look and see how many episodes you have in your feed. That would be the first place I would start. And then from there, as time permits. Basically, because that way if somebody goes get all, which you can do, I love that in Overcast, you can just click on all and it goes, do you want it all 18,000 episodes? And you're like, yep, and here they come. And I think you can do that in Apple Podcasts as well, or I know you can in iTunes, at least you used to be able to, but from there, because I'm in the same boat, I have betterdave.com, which has a new episode. Did you know there are professional cuddlers? That's a whole other topic. And I lose my mind that people are paying people $80 an hour to be a professional cuddler. Yeah. Betterdave.com. But I used to be on Mevio. Man, that is a total back in the day, which used to be Podshow. And some of my earliest episodes are still not available because I moved to Libsyn because, well, what do you know? Shocking. A free media host went out of business. And some of those I need to go back. And on occasion, I will just go to click and I'm like, wait, this is still pointing to Pod Show. And so I will upload it to Libsyn and replace the audio. But I think
it may be a good opportunity to move your archives someplace else that's not your host provider and lock them down or create a special access to them. If that's something you want to do, I know some folks do that where their back catalog is Patreon only or some of those. If you're going to go in and touch every single one, maybe a good opportunity. So, and I think what you would do on those is you would pull them down, or you probably already have the MP3s, but you would redirect or change that post to say, hey, this content is now available as part of a subscription plan or for our Patreon subscribers or whatever. You're going to touch them anyways, redo that and then put them somewhere else that you can then remonetize those. So I think if you're touching them anyways, might be a good time to say, and Dave, I think really 100 is probably a good number to think about of what you keep. That's 2 years for weekly people in most cases.
Yeah.
That's about a quarter if you're daily. So, it's 100, keeping 100 in your back catalog is probably the right number. There will be a few who are going to want to always go way back to the beginning. I think those are pretty few and far between. And don't create things for the exception. That's not the rule. I mean, you do get those, right? I know you do.
I was gonna say I would disagree because a good 60%. I need to do the math on this, but at least 50% of in a month when I look at my downloads, 50% of that is not the 4 episodes I loaded this month. It's my back catalog.
Yeah, you might be right, and your stuff is fairly evergreen, where my stuff is not, and so maybe
that's true.
Maybe I'm kind of thinking, why would anyone go back and hear about Windows Home Server 2011 when you can't even get it anymore, right?
Yeah.
But when we're talking about some of the evergreen stuff you create, so maybe you have to think about your content.
And this is something where one of my stipulations is what the file I upload is the file I want to download. Do not mess with my file name, because if I have a file name and it's whatever, Ask the Podcast Coach 09, 15, 18, and I upload that to Libsyn, and then later I move it to Blueberry, and it's still Ask the Podcast Coach 09, 15, 18, that's cool because PowerPress has a cool find and replace. So all I need to replace is the Podbean part and replace it with the new Blueberry or Libsyn part, and it should, in theory, then update all the URLs. But if it's something like SoundCloud or whatever that have somehow renamed your file, that it doesn't work because it's a whole new, and then you got to go back and replace them manually, which is
this is where picking a host provider, even the file directory that they give you is important. Some of them do this weird thing where they give you a numbering system where it's like, it's like a name of the site /085467119 / the name of your file, right? And that they're generating this thing on the fly. That's how they're keeping track of it. But that number means nothing to you, and it's not consistent anywhere else. Whereas if it was name of your host provider /audio the name of the podcast / the podcast file name, when you go to your new host provider and you're renaming that, and if their file structure is similar, you can use find and replace to fix that and do it very, very rapidly. So that's one of those really nerdy file structure things that you should know about, but nobody does because they don't want to think about those things. But the more consistent it is, the better.
And if you do anything with find and replace, please back up your website before you do that. I did that once. There's a really cool, super powerful, and it even says on it, it's like, hey, be very careful with the thing because you can shoot your face off. Yes. And I did a find and replace, and all my images went because I said, hey, if you find this, put it here, thinking it only applied to media files. And it was like, it did to everything. And also my whole website just went blank. And I went, oh, that's not good. And luckily luckily I had a backup. So I was just like, hey, restore that because we're going to do that one again. And you can, and
it goes fast. That is a mistake that happens in milliseconds and will take you months to unwind.
Yeah. And it'll make you what you're
very careful.
That's the fun thing.
It's the worst feeling. Like you're like, oh my God, I have just crushed every post. And then you start thinking, okay, how can I use find and replace to fix that? And you end up, it's one.
You try to replace the thing you just replaced. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And pretty soon your site doesn't work. And, so it sounds good on the surface, but test. I always, I maybe do if I'm going to say I'm going to update hundreds of things that way, I'll do the first 10 manually to make sure, show me some examples of what's coming up first when you're finding things, just to make sure it's only finding the video files or it's only finding whatever like that I want to replace. It's very easy to use and very easy to screw a whole bunch of stuff up.
Yeah, I just remember when I did mine, I was like, okay, cool. Because you click and it's like run. It's like, and we're done. And you're like, really? You go back to your website and you hit refresh and you go, oh, it's like the worst, like, oh, I didn't think about that. It's the ultimate, you just hear Homer Stimson in like 5.1 surround sound going, don't, it's like
you're so mad at yourself. And then
Right.
most people don't know how to restore their site from a backup. So, or they're not doing it, and they're like, oh my God, I just changed everything. And it's not like there's an undo button in a lot of cases where you can just, just kidding.
Yeah, usually there's a big button that says, are you sure you want to do this? Because this can't be undone. And you're like, yeah, what's the big deal? Click. Oh, yeah. So
that was the big deal.
That was the big deal.
Oh, I get it now. I get it. It's a big deal. Dave, this week yesterday, I was on the road speaking we saw some 400 college students. And I was talking about, it's my job to sell Gallup and get them to apply for internship jobs. I tried something interesting I'd never done before with this group I tell them, sometimes they'd ask me what I do. And part of my intro now is, especially in that group of people, as I say, I'm a YouTuber for Gallup. And the look on their face is like, I get that interesting look from them. Like, oh, and I never thought of saying it that way. Like, hey, I'm a YouTuber for Gallup. And it's an interest thing. And I think to this current generation, right, this of students 15 to 25, maybe even 15 to 30, that actually, I think sometimes we make fun of that, but that's a real thing for them. Like that, all of a sudden they go, oh, interesting, and it opens some doors to some conversation about what I do and how we're using, our YouTube videos to influence our customers. And it just was surprising to me when I say YouTube to my friend YouTuber. I'm a YouTuber to my old friends at work. They laugh at me. Right. When I say YouTuber to the kids, they all go, "Oh, that's interesting." So I'm wondering if there's a little we have to kind of think through these things. Most of our target audience, Dave, is they look like us, sort of, and we would think that term YouTuber may be a little weird. But I'm thinking we might want to use that word a little bit more, especially with the young kids.
Well, that's it. Because when you walk in, they're like, oh, who's the old white dude? Right. And then you go YouTuber and they're like, wait, hold on.
Exactly. What?
Yeah. And so Carrie's saying in the chat room, she says her daughter just turned 7, tells me she wants to be a YouTuber. I was talking to Rob Walsh. I was with him at Content Marketing World, and he said he's got, I think, a 9 and a 7-year-old. He goes, that's all they do. They're either playing video games, and Rob, because he's a big giant nerd, he has a whole studio, like a video studio in his basement. And like his kids come over, and what do? They go play on YouTube. Like they go make videos and stuff like that. And he goes, and actually, some of them they get pretty creative with. And he goes, that's how they play. They're like, we want to make videos and stuff like that. And they want to have their own YouTube channel. I'm not sure what the age limit is on that. He goes, but a lot of their kids just come over, and he says they're either playing Fortnite, which I feel like I'm the oldest dude on the planet because I've yet to see Fortnite. But from what I understand, it's all the rage, and that's what they do. Uh-huh. And he goes, and then they want to make videos, and he goes, it's actually pretty funny. And he goes, what's interesting is sometimes dad will get involved to help make the video, and he goes, it becomes this really weird Norman Rockwell parenting bonding thing about making a YouTube video. He goes, but who cares? It's a time. He goes, you're making memories with your kids. Who cares if you're playing Parcheesi or Monopoly? I'm trying to think of something really old game here, or if it's making a video. But yeah, and it was Corey Finneran was saying, I think it was Corey, that he was someplace and there were a bunch of kids playing, and they're literally in there talking into like a hairbrush, like a microphone. They're like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, oh, we're podcasting. We're playing Podcaster. You're like, you're what? So
yeah. They're saying they're locked on you, by the way. In the chat room.
They are.
No worries.
Sorry about that.
Nobody really wants to see me anyways. But I think it's we've been fighting over this term podcaster, or do we call him podcast, or does it need to have a different name? And I'm finding that in the circles, in my target audience circles, so my 25 to 55 categories, podcasting works just great. People understand what that means now, and I'm talking average guy stuff. They're getting it. I don't think we need to have that debate anymore. It's the word. It works just fine. But I think if you're reaching these students and you're not using the YouTuber idea, if you're not calling yourself a YouTuber, they get that. And so if you're trying to reach that audience in Fortnite, PUBG, those kinds of things. But there is I've admitted to this. I'm watching a guy on YouTube build a ship, like a wooden yacht. And it's super interesting. And he's really good at it. Like he goes into the detail and goes into the math and talks about the structures and, and it's not just theory, but he's actually using, he's using planers and big ship cutting saws and stuff. And you're like, this is incredibly satisfying to watch this guy do this. Ship building is not it's not like everybody's doing it. Like, you wouldn't think it's a popular category. He has a gigantic Patreon following. Leo is his name. He has this gigantic Patreon following, and it's going to only get bigger. It's going to take a couple years for him to do it. And you think it's a ship,
right?
Like this guy is building, but he's interesting. That's what's important, is he is interesting.
That's it.
Don't be boring.
That's it, man.
Yeah, he's super interesting. And I'm watching this couple build this timber frame house in northern Idaho, and they're just a regular couple, and they do great videos. And actually their videos are 2 months behind at this point of their actual progress, but it's great because it's them, right? It's real. So we get this question, I think, all the time. Do I need to be on YouTube? I'm changing. My answer was, well, like your podcast, no, talking heads, blah, blah, blah. I'm kind of thinking, yeah, actually you do. You need to have something interesting on YouTube as well. I just think you can't miss this one.
Yeah, it's on my list of things. If you remember, I still have the School of Podcasting banner that in theory was going to go back here. Yeah. And I'm just, it's weird. I'm kind of emotionally contacted or connected with the images behind me.
Right on.
So I'm trying to figure out how to do both. I was actually looking at Home Depot of making out of plumbing, like PVC plumbing, like a thing I could just come in, set up, put the School of Podcasting banner on that, and then literally drag it to the hallway to get it. So I could just have this mobile like backdrop to pull in and out. I'm thinking a couple different ways just to rearrange my whole studio because, Kim mentioned earlier, it's nice to see that the Hall of Fame thing is off the, but I still have, it's, the Hall of Fame is sitting next to my trash bags and my business cards. It's classy.
And your cat treats that you still haven't gotten rid of.
Yeah. So, but I need to, I don't, it's one of those things. Some people would go, I love your background because it's real, but I'm kind of like, if I'm going to do so that's the thing. Yeah. I'm starting to think about doing a quote real YouTube channel. And I'm like, maybe you might want to, I would love to get rid of my lights and get some, I need to talk to Daniel. Daniel's always up on the video stuff, or Ray. I would like to get some smaller, I see these round lights now but they need to be something that plugs in. I don't want anything battery operated. That to me just sounds like a headache. But I'd like to get them something I could put on my desk as opposed to big giant stands that take up 30% of my audience, because they're literally they're almost touching my ceiling. So they're probably, 8-9 feet tall. So I have the stand super duper out, which this is not a big office, so I just need to figure that. But that is one of the things I'm like, I would like to start make just really quick, like 5-minute videos about here's how you record a phone call on Skype, you know what I mean? And get all those questions and just frequently ask questions. And so,
but Dave, to be a real YouTuber, we're maybe we'll talk about this.
I'm going to say that we should probably, he said, hitting a button, we probably should start to wrap things up. We do want to thank the chat room. The chat room is always awesome. It's nice to be back.
Yeah, smaller today, but they were rocking. Like this is the most I've seen them. They were really on top of it today in the chat room.
They had their whole they had a whole conversation over there about Facebook pixels, and I'm like, okay,
you got to join us live. Like if you're listening to this recorded version and you have not come out on a Saturday morning, 9:30 Central, 10:30 Eastern, come out here and join us. This is the best group of podcasters on the planet, right now in our chat room. Not us, but these guys in the chat room are great.
Well, when I was on Ed's show, podcasting for Radio Dummies, and he was talking about our chemistry, and I go, I love working with Jim. Jim's awesome, and it's great. I love the fact that we have different angles on different stuff. I said, but the star of that show is the chat room. Yeah. I go, because a lot of times they're the ones directing the traffic, or again, it's another point of view, which, leads you to different thoughts and things like that. Kim, what did you put a link to? That is the world's longest link in the chat room. That's amazing. It's like, I can't. Okay. But anyway, Jim, what's coming up on theaverageguy.tv?
Yeah, we had the guys from Zmoto in, and they had this really cool Snap Pro camera. You wouldn't use this necessarily for podcasting, but think about a mobile security camera in your home, or if you want to monitor your pets or whatever, you can literally just move this camera around in your house, battery operated, and monitor anything you want. Super cool from Zmoto. They're on the latest edition. It's actually sitting in the queue, Dave. I have 2 podcasts to produce this weekend, so I'm going to be a little busy. But it will be out there shortly, Zmoto.
And I have been threatening this for weeks. I am actually going to finally open up the Tascam US 42. I keep saying I'm going to review this, and doggone it, I am. And then I have no idea what else is. I have a couple of things in my Evernote that I might talk about on the School of Podcasting. But thanks for tuning in. We're here every Saturday, 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. AskThePodcastCoach.com/live. Stick around for some post show.